Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Vov Amud Beis. 4 lines from the bottom at the new Mishnah. The previous Mishnah had taught us that a person closes a door, trapping a tzvi that is inside of it. In other words, the tzvi on its own went into a room, and a person closed the door. That is an act of Seder on Shabbos. Is chayiv for that. The Mishnah also taught us that if indeed 2 people close the door together, where it's a case where both are able to close the door on their own, ze yachal v'ze yachal. So they're both going to be potter because it's shnayim she'asua. Another case that the Mishnah taught was where 2 people cannot close the door on their own, and therefore they need each other to do the malach of closing the door and trapping it. They'll both be chayiv when they close the door together, according to the Tana Kama, a case of shnayim that are doing the malacha, ze eino yachal v'ze eino yachal. Our Mishnah now includes other cases. Says the Mishnah, Yoshav ha'echad ala pesach v'lo mil'ahu. The Mishnah now teaches that if a person sits at the doorway where the deer is inside, and he's not able to close the doorway, in other words, he's not wide enough that closes the space of the doorway, Yoshav hasheni umilahu. A second person sits by his side and now closes that space. Says the Mishnah, Hasheni Chayiv, the second one will be held liable because he's the one who indeed traps the deer inside. Yoshav Harishon ala Pesach umilahu. If the first one sat at the Pesach and he is big enough to close the space of the doorway on his own, Ubo Hasheni v'Yoshav b'tzidoy, and a second person sits, let's say, inside of between him and the room. Even if the first one, though, gets up and he leaves, the first one will be held accountable because he's the one who did the tzeidah, the act of trapping. And the second will be potter. In other words, the second one was merely shomer, the tzvi that was already trapped inside. So even though he now is also closing up the space, but that space was already closed up by the first one. The fact that the first one leaves the second one in place, the second one is merely being shomer what was already trapped, and therefore he's not going to be held accountable. The Mishnah concludes, what is this comparable to? Linoyal es beisoy l'shomroi. If you have, let's say, a room where a tzvi is tied by a rope inside that room, and a person comes along and he closes the door. By closing the door, he's not trapping the tzvi. He's just merely causing greater security for the trapped tzvi. And therefore, the one who closes the door will be potter. The Gemara explained, that means, what type of potter is that? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rav Chia Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. On the top of Kuf Zayin Amir Aleph, explains the Gemara, Nichnasa lo tzipor tachas knofov. If a bird enters underneath a person's clothes, let's say in the inside of his clothes, and gets stuck inside of the clothes, Yoishev u'mishamroi ashetechshach. The person can sit and remain being shomer the tzipor inside of his clothing, and doesn't have to release the tzipor, and he can do that until nightfall, and he's not doing anything wrong. Ask the Gemara, Masi Rav Nachman by Yitzchok. Rav Nachman by Yitzchok asks from our Mishnah, Yoshav Harishon ala Pesach umilahu. If a person first sits down and he closes the doorway, trapping the tzvi inside, Uba Hasheni v'Yoshav b'tzidoy, and the second one comes and sits on his side. In other words, let's say in between him and the inside of the room. V'Yoshav b'tzidoy afal pisha omar harishon v'holach. Even if the first person were to get up and leave, harishon chayiv v'Hasheni potter. The rishon who first sat down, trapped the animal, he will be held accountable. And even though he leaves, leaving the second one there, closing that space, nonetheless, the second one is potter because the second one is merely being shomer, that which was already trapped. So the Gemara is now asking, if so, How can you tell me that when the bird enters a person's clothing, let's say he goes inside the clothes and gets stuck in the sleeve of the shirt of the person? How can you tell me that lechatchila can go ahead and remain there being shomer the tzipor until nightfall? Hare, the Mishnah says that the second person is going to be potter. Mashma, says the Gemara, my lab potter aval oser. Doesn't that imply that he is potter aval oser? Always when we say potter, we refer to being potter from a korban chatos, but also midirabanan. So how can you tell me then that a person who does this, allowing the tzipor to remain, not letting it go, but being shomer the tzipor inside of the shirt, is going to be is able to do that lechatchila? Answers Gemara loy. The kavan of the Mishnah when it says potter doesn't mean potter aval also like it does in most places. It means potter umutter. It's actually mutter lechatchila. That means that the second person who sat down after the first person sat down and trapped the deer, while the second person sits next to him, even though he is as wide as the first person closing up the space when the first person leaves, but since it was already closed and the tzvi was trapped inside, he's considered to be just being merely shomer the tzvi inside. Just like a person who already trapped an animal before Shabbos, and he goes ahead and sits down, let's say in the example where he trapped the animal by tying the tzvi inside of the room, and the second person now on Shabbos closes the door. The person who closes the door is not chayiv anything. Lechatchila, he's able to close the door. He's just being shomer the tzvi inside. And the Gemara now explains, Hachinami mistabro. It's mistabro to say that here it means potter umutter, mediktoni seifa, like the Mishnah tells us. In that case, lemazeh doimer, what is it comparable to? Lenoil es beisoy l'shoimroi. V'nimtzet tzvi shomer b'soichoi. That a person who merely closes the door, like we said just a moment ago, that when the tzvi is already tied and trapped, and he merely closes the door, all he's doing is improving the security, but he's not now making the tzvi trapped. Michlal de potter umutter. And since a person can do that, we don't find any problem whatsoever. Therefore, we see that potter over here means potter umutter shma mino. Ikadamer, the Gemara brings another version. Not only in the case where the tzipor comes into a person's clothing do we say a person can be shomer, but we also taught that in our Mishnah. Even though the first person who sat down closing the door space, trapping the tzvi inside, gets up and leaves, Harishon chai v'asheni potter. The Rishon still will be held accountable because he's the one who trapped, while the second one is potter. My lab potter or mutter doesn't imply that potter over here means potter or mutter, and therefore we have the same exact case in our Mishnah supporting the scenario that we just described before, where a person has a bird that comes into his clothing. The Gemara says, "Lo, potter aval aser means potter aval aser." The Gemara Chen says back, wait a second, from the fact that indeed the Sefer says holamazet doime lenoyel es beiso l'shoimroi. It's like compared to a person who closes the door already, just shomer, being shomer, protecting the tzvi that is inside, which is already trapped because it's already roped down. It then follows that is potter and mutter. Shmamina, indeed, also over here in this case, when the bird flies inside somebody's garment and he merely is shomer it until nightfall, that is going to be potter or mutter, and therefore lechatchila can go ahead and remain there with the bird without having to release the bird from its trap. Omar Shmuel now tells us that in addition to what we just learned in our Mishnah, potter means potter aval mutter. We find that in other places as well as exceptions. Kol peturi de Shabbos potter aval aser. Everywhere when it says potter on Shabbos, it means normally potter mi korban chatos va'aser midirabonon. Lebar mehani tlas de potter umutter, with the exception of 3 exceptions that are potter and mutter lechatchila. Chadaha, one is that we just brought in our own Mishnah. Umimai de potter umutter. Why do we say that it's potter and mutter? The Gemara now brings a proof again from the Seifa as it did before. Dektani Seifa. Like a person who merely closes the door then causing additional shmira on a tzvi that's already trapped because he's tied down. And therefore, just like that is mutter lechatchila, so too, when the second person sits beside the first person, that will be then mutter lechatchila. The idach, another case where potter means potter umutter, hamapis mursa b'shabbos. A person pierces a boil that has inside of it leicha. It has leicha inside of it. Pus inside of it. Im lasois lo peh chayiv. If he does so in order to then be machnis and moitzi, he wants to then machnis air and moitzi the leicha, then it's going to be chayiv, either for boina or makeh bepatish, as a tikkun to the kli, to the body. Im lo hoitzi mimena leicha potter. But merely if it's just to then allow the pus to go out, he doesn't care that the hole closes right away, then it's going to be potter. Umay the potter mutter. How do you know that means potter and mutter lechatchila? This nan. For it says in the following Mishnah, Machat shel yad litol b'sakoitz. You can take a needle and to take out a thorn. So here you don't mind that the hole closes as long as you take out the thorn. That's fine. And here, because b'makom tsar lo gozer rabbanon, they said it's not a problem at all. Therefore, it's mutter lechatchila, just like in this case as well. The third case, v'idoch, that it's potter and mutter, is as follows: Hatzad nachash b'Shabbos, a person who traps a snake on Shabbos that's coming to then bite him. Now we're not talking about a lethal snake because that would be pikuach nefesh. That is doiche Shabbos. That certainly is the case. But here we're talking about even if it would just cause a bite, that would be a painful bite. Im misasek bo shelo yishchena potter. If indeed he's just merely trying to then trap it so that it doesn't bite him, it's going to be potter. Im lerefu, however, is taking the snake and trying to trap it in order to then use the snake for refuah purposes, chayev. Umemai potter mutter. How do you know that it's potter and mutter? The Gemara brings a proof. This nan koifin ke'ara. A person takes a bowl and he covers al haner b'shvir shelo tochaz bekara on a lamp, so that it doesn't then light, it doesn't then cause the ceiling to become inflamed, it doesn't cause a fire. Now we're talking about a case where he doesn't completely close the ner and leaving it without any oxygen, because then it will then mechabe the ner, that'll be aser midiaraisa, but rather leave some space in between, enough so that it will then not go out. But this, it says over here, is indeed something that he can do in order to then cause it so that it will not be a fire. And again, this is not necessarily pikuach nefesh. Another example the Mishnah brings, v'al tsoya shel koton. Here, a graf shel re'i can go ahead and cover the tsoya of a koton with the bowl. And by the way, we're talking about a bowl that is made out of ceramic. So therefore, if it was made out of metal, however, then it will be problematic because the metal will become heated up and it will probably be a problem of bishul or mavir. And the final example the Mishnah brings is v'al tsoya shel akar shel tishach. And on a scorpion, again, that's not lethal, that shouldn't bite a person, that a person can trap this scorpion by covering it up. And here we're talking about a case, therefore it's mutter lechatchila, so too in the case when a person will then trap a nachash so that it doesn't bite him, is mutter lechatchila. Hadron Allah ha'oreg. The next parak speaks about also melechet seida, but in addition to that, includes another malach of choyvel. Says the Mishnah, Shmoina shrotzim ha'amurim b'Torah. There are 8 shrotzim that are enumerated by the Torah in regards to then being metame a person. We mentioned the tumah of sheretz many times. What's unique about these shmona shrotzim is that their nevela is metame, just like the nevela of a chaya and of a behema. These shmona shrotzim, hatzadin v'achoyvel ben chayv. If a person traps them, so normally he needs the shmona shrotzim because of a purpose, a constructed purpose, and therefore he traps it because he wants, for example, the skin. And we're talking about, since they are not nitzod v'oimed, thereby the trapping would be chayiv chatos. Also, a person is choyvel these shmona shrotzim, not only when it then causes blood to then come out, that would be true with all shrotzim, just like taking out blood from an animal and a behema or chaya or an oif. That certainly would be the case. But even in the case of chavola, where it doesn't cause the blood to actually leave the body, but it gets stuck in between the flesh and the skin, because these shmona shrotim have thick skin, just like animals and birds, therefore they cause bruises that are not chayzer. The bruises that are not chayzer is a chavola that a person will be chayav for in chatos. What would be chayav? What would be malacha? There's different understandings. Either it's because he would be chayav for netilas neshama, because dam hu nefesh, and he causes the dam to be oiker from its place and be stuck now between the basar and the or it would be a malacha of tzviya, when he wants to then dye the skin. And there are others that explain differently, but those are two main reasons why a person would be chayiv for chavola from one of the shmona shrotzim. The Mishnah continues, Shar shrotzim uremosim hachoyvel behen potter, because they don't have thick skin. Therefore, when a person then is choyvel these shar shrotzim, then normally it's a chavola that is chayzeres. The dam will be chayzer, and therefore it's not considered to be that he'll be chayav for, he'll be potter. Hatzodem litzarech chayav, if he traps these shar shrotzim, then if it's litzarech, because he needs it for, let's say, medicinal purposes or whatever, he'll be chayiv. Shaloi litzarech potter. But if it's not litzarech, he'll be potter. And this is the shita of Rabbi Shimon that says even if it's not for the constructive purpose, but there's an additional benefit why a person would then tzad, in this case the shrotzim, then it's a malacha shenitzricha leguf and be potter. The Mishnah continues, chayav va'oif shebereshusoi. If we're talking about domesticated animals, let's say like a mule or a chicken that are in person's reshus, hatzodan potter, since they're nitzoid ve'oimed, therefore by being tzad them, it's potter because they're domesticated. Hachoyv ben chay, but because they're animals or birds that have again thick skins, all of these animals and birds are going to be chayiv, being chayvil, not only again when the blood comes out, but even when the blood is ne'ekar from the basar and then stays by the or, between the basar and the or, and is not chayzeres, will be also chayiv for malaches chavala, either because of netilas neshama, or some say for tzviya, or other reasons.